Let's go back to 1830s America, before the stovepipe hat, before the Gettysburg Address, before the weight of a divided nation rested on his thin shoulders. Abraham Lincoln was not yet the revered icon of American history. He was a lanky, awkward young man in his 20s, just trying to make sense of life in a one-room cabin, reading borrowed books by candlelight, and figuring out how to earn a living in New Salem, Illinois. And he was not alone. For nearly 4 years, Lincoln shared his narrow bed with another man, Joshua Speed, a handsome, well-to-do merchant's son with a charming smile and an easy laugh. They lived together, ate together, and yes, slept together in the same small bed above Speed's general store. Now, let's pause right there. By today's standards, that detail raises eyebrows. A U.S. president sleeping in the same bed with his male best friend. In a world hyper-alert to hidden meanings, it seems almost too juicy to be true. But in the 19th century, especially on the American frontier, such an arrangement wasn't nearly as shocking as it might sound today. Beds were expensive. Space was limited. And two grown men, especially young bachelors, sharing a bed wasn't just normal, it was practical. In fact, the term sleeping with didn't carry the same undertones back then. It was more like saying rooming with or boarding with. Still, there was something different about Abraham and Joshua. Theirs wasn't a brief arrangement. It wasn't a week, or a month, or even a harsh winter. It was nearly 4 years of sharing a life, both the mundane and the meaningful. They laughed together, traveled together, and opened up to each other in long letters and lingering conversations that reveal more than mere convenience. Lincoln once wrote that he was the most miserable man living. Speed was often the one he turned to in those dark moments, offering solace, understanding, and a kind of emotional intimacy that Lincoln rarely allowed others to see. So, what do we make of it? Some historians call it nothing more than close male friendship, a type of relationship that has largely disappeared in the modern world, replaced by suspicion and boundaries. Others wonder if it was something more, an unspoken truth buried beneath polite language and Victorian modesty. To be clear, we're not here to slap modern labels onto the past. But we are here to explore a story that's been quietly whispered through history. A tale of two men, one bed, and a bond that defied easy explanation. Because even if it wasn't romantic, it was rare. Even if it wasn't physical, it was powerful. And even if it wasn't a secret, it's still something most history books glide past with vague phrasing and a nervous footnote. But not tonight. Tonight, we climb into that little wooden bed above the general store. We pull the scratchy wool blanket up to our chins. We listen to the soft breathing of two friends, one of whom would go on to reshape a nation, and the other who quietly shaped the man behind it. In a world where men were expected to be stoic, stern, and emotionally silent, Abraham Lincoln found comfort in conversation, vulnerability in friendship, and, yes, warmth in shared sleep. This was not scandal. This was not shame. This was the story of a lonely heart finding company in another. And that's where we begin. Before we interpret Lincoln's bedtime habits through our modern lens, we need to take a quiet little walk through the sleep culture of the 1800s, a time when sharing a bed wasn't considered strange, but practical. In frontier America, beds were a limited resource. Inns were crowded, homes were small, and warmth was often shared out of necessity, not affection. Men who traveled or worked together frequently shared beds, not because they were intimate, but because there were simply no other options. The concept of personal space had not yet settled into the American consciousness. But even in that context, something about Abraham Lincoln and Joshua Speed's sleeping arrangement still feels unusually tender. Lincoln moved into Speed's small room above a general store in Springfield, Illinois, in 1837. The two men shared a narrow bed for over 4 years. That's longer than some marriages. And in a letter to a mutual friend, Speed described the moment Lincoln first climbed into the bed beside him, not in a rushed or awkward way, but almost ceremonially, as if they both knew they were entering a new chapter in life. Lincoln was 28 years old at the time, tall, melancholic, and deeply insecure. He had just arrived in Springfield to begin his law career, carrying all his belongings in 2 saddlebags. Speed, the son of a wealthy Kentucky planter, offered Lincoln a place to stay, and Lincoln accepted, gratefully. What followed was not just a cohabitation, but a kind of emotional partnership. The two men talked deep into the night. They confided their fears, their political dreams, their romantic failures. According to Speed's own account, Lincoln even suffered a nervous breakdown after a broken engagement, and it was Speed who nursed him back to emotional stability. By candlelight and over countless quiet evenings, the bond between them deepened. While society may not have labeled it anything more than friendship, their relationship had the intensity of something more complicated. And yet, the language of the time had no words for this kind of closeness. In the 19th century, there existed a form of male intimacy now referred to by historians as romantic friendship. These were passionate, emotionally intense relationships between men, often expressed through letters filled with affection and gestures that, today, might raise eyebrows. These friendships weren't necessarily sexual, but they were often deeply physical, involving hand-holding, embracing, even sleeping together, and no one in society thought it was odd. At least, not then. So when we say Abraham Lincoln slept with his best friend, we're not necessarily suggesting scandal. We're suggesting a closeness that defies modern categories. In a time before therapy, before emotional literacy, before men were taught how to talk about their feelings, Lincoln found solace in the presence of someone who simply understood him. And that may have been the most intimate act of all. The story of Abraham Lincoln and Joshua Speed is not just about sharing a bed or a roof. It's about the words they exchanged, the letters that peeled back the layers of Lincoln's guarded heart. Though many letters between them have been lost, the ones that remain reveal an intimacy rare for any era. A closeness that transcended mere friendship but rarely stepped into public view. In one letter, Lincoln confided to Speed his deepest fears, his bouts of depression, his feelings of isolation, and his doubts about the future. Speed, ever the steady confidant, replied with reassurance, encouraging Lincoln to keep faith in himself. Their letters were filled with warmth and concern, often ending with phrases like "yours as ever" or "your friend always." It was a language of loyalty, silent, steadfast, and resolute. But more than just words on paper, the letters offer a glimpse of the emotional refuge Speed provided Lincoln. In a time when men were expected to be stoic, Lincoln could express vulnerability only in the safe space Speed created. Historians have debated the nature of their relationship for decades. Some say it was simply the deepest of friendships. Others suggest it carried emotional and perhaps physical intimacy. Yet, no matter the interpretation, one truth remains. Lincoln found in Speed a rare companion who accepted him wholly. Speed's influence on Lincoln extended beyond personal comfort. He was a sounding board for political ideas and moral dilemmas. When Lincoln wrestled with questions of law, justice, and leadership, Speed was there, listening, debating, supporting. And when Lincoln's heart was broken by failed romances and the harsh realities of frontier life, Speed's friendship was a lifeline. Together, they navigated the uncertain years before Lincoln's rise, building a foundation of trust and care that would echo throughout Lincoln's life, even as they parted ways geographically. This correspondence wasn't just letters, it was lifeblood. A testament to the power of friendship in the face of loneliness and struggle. Beyond letters and shared beds, Abraham Lincoln and Joshua Speed's friendship was built on everyday moments, simple, yet profound, that defined their years together in Springfield. They weren't just roommates, they were companions navigating the uncertainties of young adulthood in a frontier town. Speed, coming from a wealthy Kentucky family, was accustomed to certain comforts: fine clothes, educated manners, and social ease. Lincoln, on the other hand, arrived in Springfield as a self-taught, lanky lawyer with little money and even less social polish. Yet, despite their differences, they found common ground. In the evenings, after the shop closed, the two men would sit by the hearth, discussing politics, law, and philosophy. Speed had a library filled with books, and Lincoln devoured them, hungry for knowledge and new ideas. Their conversations were intense and thoughtful. Speed challenged Lincoln's views, and Lincoln's wit and honesty captivated Speed. More than intellectual companions, they shared moments of laughter, joy, and even sorrow. When Lincoln's early love affairs ended in heartbreak, it was Speed who comforted him. When Lincoln struggled with his mounting anxieties and depression, what we might today call clinical depression, Speed stood by him with quiet support. Living together meant they witnessed each other's vulnerabilities and strengths in a way few ever would. They cooked meals together, shared clothes, and even dealt with the occasional pest or leak in the attic room above the general store. Their physical closeness, sharing a single bed, sitting side by side for hours, was an extension of a deeper emotional intimacy, forged in a world where men rarely showed softness in public. Historians point to the longevity and consistency of their relationship as evidence of something rare, a true and lasting bond. Even after Lincoln married and moved to the White House, he kept in close contact with Speed, seeking his advice and friendship through the turbulent years ahead. Their friendship, forged in shared beds and shared dreams, became one of the defining relationships of Lincoln's life. It was a bond that transcended the expectations of their time, defying simple labels, and reminding us that human connection, no matter the era, is complex, vital, and deeply needed. As the years passed, the rhythms of life began to pull Abraham Lincoln and Joshua Speed onto different paths. A common fate for many friendships, but one that tested the strength of their bond in unexpected ways. In 1841, Lincoln married Mary Todd, a union that brought new responsibilities and demands. No longer a young bachelor sharing a single bed in a modest Springfield room, he now faced the pressures of family life and rising political ambitions. Meanwhile, Joshua Speed's path diverged as well. Eventually, he returned to his native Kentucky, where his family owned plantations, and he took up the life of a merchant and a plantation manager. The physical distance between them was vast, but the emotional distance never fully grew. They continued to write letters, keeping the lines of communication open, sharing news of politics, personal challenges, and the daily struggles that defined mid-19th century America. Their correspondence is peppered with warmth, concern, and sometimes frank discussions about loneliness and longing. In one letter, Lincoln confided about the profound loneliness that accompanied political life, a loneliness that no public success could remedy. Speed replied with empathy, reminding Lincoln of their shared past and offering words of comfort. Despite their separate lives, Lincoln regarded Speed as his closest and most trusted confidant. Even during the darkest days of Lincoln's presidency, when the Civil War threatened to tear the nation apart, Speed's friendship remained a touchstone of stability. It was Speed who offered Lincoln a place to rest away from the White House in 1862, when the weight of the presidency threatened to crush him. Their friendship was a quiet sanctuary amid the storms of history. But their letters also reveal the tensions beneath the surface, the challenges of maintaining intimacy over distance and time. They discussed politics and war with urgency, but the personal tone never faded. For Lincoln and Speed, their bond was a lifeline, one that weathered the upheavals of a nation and the complexities of two very different lives. Despite the warmth and depth of their friendship, Abraham Lincoln and Joshua Speed's relationship has long puzzled historians, biographers, and cultural commentators alike. Why? Because the idea of two adult men sharing a bed for years, exchanging letters filled with heartfelt emotion, and sustaining a close bond over decades, doesn't easily fit into the neat categories of friendship we use today. Some historians argue that Lincoln and Speed's relationship was simply an example of romantic friendship, a common social practice in the 19th century where men expressed love and devotion to each other without sexual implications. Others speculate that there may have been more, a quiet, private romance carefully concealed beneath layers of societal expectation and personal discretion. But here's the thing, the truth is elusive. Lincoln never left a direct confession or explicit evidence. The records are silent on the matter, as was typical of the time when such matters were private and rarely discussed. Yet, historians who study Lincoln's life recognize the profound emotional impact Speed had on him. Biographer Doris Kearns Goodwin described Speed as one of the most important people in Lincoln's early life, a man who helped shape Lincoln's character and resilience. Historian David Herbert Donald noted that Lincoln's letters to Speed reveal a depth of feeling that was unusual even for close friendships. The language of their correspondence is tender and filled with concern for each other's well-being. Importantly, in the context of the time, expressing affection between men was not taboo but part of everyday life. What makes their story remarkable is how enduring it was, how it helped Lincoln survive some of his darkest moments, emotionally and politically. Whether it was love or friendship, or something in between, the relationship between Abraham Lincoln and Joshua Speed reminds us that human connections are complex, multifaceted, and often defy easy definition. It challenges us to rethink our assumptions about intimacy, masculinity, and history itself. In the end, their story is not about labels. It is about two men who found in each other a rare and precious bond, one that shaped a president and perhaps, in some small way, the course of a nation. As the nation plunged into the turmoil of the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln's burdens grew heavier by the day. The man who once shared a bed with Joshua Speed now faced the unimaginable task of preserving a fractured Union. But amid the chaos of war and the pressures of leadership, Lincoln's bond with Speed endured, though time and distance tested it in new ways. Speed, living in Kentucky, a border state torn between Union and Confederacy, faced his own set of challenges. His loyalties and safety were constantly in question, and the horrors of war shadowed his daily life. Despite these strains, Speed remained a loyal correspondent to Lincoln, their letters offering rare moments of solace and friendship amid the bloodshed. Lincoln's letters, when he could spare the time, often revealed glimpses of vulnerability, worries over the fate of the nation, reflections on loss, and the deep loneliness that accompanied his role as president. Speed responded with empathy, grounding Lincoln in the friendship they'd built years before. Though the war separated them physically, their connection was a source of emotional strength, proof that even the greatest leaders relied on personal relationships to endure hardship. Tragically, the war also brought profound loss. Lincoln's own family suffered, with the death of his son Willie casting a shadow over the White House. Speed, too, faced his own struggles and losses back home. Despite the upheaval, their friendship never waned. It was a quiet testament to loyalty, one that outlasted the battles and politics. In those final years before Lincoln's assassination, their letters slowed but remained heartfelt, a reminder that beneath the monumental figure of the president was a man who cherished the steadfast companionship of a lifelong friend. The story of Abraham Lincoln and Joshua Speed is more than just a historical curiosity. It's a timeless lesson about friendship, vulnerability, and the human need for connection. In an age when emotional expression among men was rare and often suppressed, Lincoln and Speed's relationship stands out as a beacon of openness and trust. They showed that even the strongest men, even presidents, need someone to lean on. Today, their story challenges modern ideas about masculinity and friendship. It invites us to reconsider what it means to be close to another person, without fear, judgment, or constraint. Their bond also reveals the quiet power of emotional support in shaping a person's character and resilience. Lincoln, faced with immense pressure and tragedy, found in Speed a refuge where he could be himself, flaws and all. For historians and everyday people alike, their relationship encourages a deeper understanding of the complexities of human affection beyond the labels we often rely on. Whether friends, lovers, or something in between, Lincoln and Speed remind us that love and loyalty take many forms, and that the courage to be vulnerable is one of the greatest strengths a person can have. In a world that often prizes toughness and distance, their story is a gentle call to embrace connection, empathy, and the enduring power of friendship. Over the decades, Abraham Lincoln and Joshua Speed's relationship has been the subject of much debate, myth-making, and speculation. Popular culture, historians, and scholars have often wrestled with how to interpret their closeness, frequently projecting contemporary ideas onto a relationship forged in a very different time. Some narratives have sensationalized their bond, suggesting scandal or hidden romance, while others have downplayed it as mere friendship. But both extremes miss the nuanced truth. Their relationship was complex, deeply meaningful, and defied simple classification. The Victorian era had different social norms and understandings of male intimacy, which allowed for expressions of affection that seem unfamiliar or even confusing today. Lincoln and Speed's letters and shared life challenge us to appreciate the historical context and resist the urge to fit their story into modern boxes. Instead, it's more useful to see their friendship as an example of emotional depth, trust, and mutual care, qualities that transcend time. Their relationship also highlights how history can sometimes obscure the emotional lives of its figures, reminding us that the past is not always as distant or different as it seems. Understanding Lincoln and Speed invites us to broaden our perspectives, not only on historical friendships but also on how we relate to each other today. Even after Joshua Speed left Springfield and returned to his family's plantation in Kentucky, his presence in Abraham Lincoln's life never fully disappeared. Their friendship had shaped Lincoln in ways both subtle and profound. Though the two men no longer shared a bed, or even a home, Lincoln would continue to write to Speed for years, often about deeply personal topics. When Lincoln married Mary Todd, he confided his doubts and fears in Speed, writing with a vulnerability that echoed the raw honesty of their boarding house days. In one particularly revealing letter, Lincoln described marriage as a matter of profound anxiety, seeking reassurance from the one person who had seen him at his most uncertain. Speed, now married as well, responded with warmth and empathy. The bond between them had evolved, but the emotional connection endured. Even during Lincoln's presidency, decades after they had lived together, he still welcomed visits from Speed, who once stayed overnight at the White House. Their conversations, though undocumented in detail, likely carried echoes of the young men they once were. When Lincoln was weighed down by war, grief, and the weight of a nation tearing itself apart, one wonders how often he thought of that upstairs room in Springfield, the one with the shared mattress, the long nights, the whispered confessions. Joshua Speed had given Lincoln more than a place to sleep. He'd given him safety, understanding, and a mirror in which to see himself more clearly. In a time when public men were rarely allowed private doubts, Speed was a refuge. And Lincoln never forgot it. The story of Abraham Lincoln and Joshua Speed has lived in the margins of history books, too intimate to ignore, too ambiguous to explain away. In the 19th century, two men sharing a bed wasn't scandalous. In fact, it was common. Inns were expensive, spare rooms were rare, and physical closeness didn't always imply romantic closeness. But Lincoln and Speed were not just two strangers sharing a mattress to save $1. They were emotionally intertwined in a way that startled even their contemporaries. Letters between them read like private journal entries. Their parting in 1841 shook Lincoln so deeply that he referred to his depression as the worst season of his life. And when they reunited, there was a kind of healing, as if a missing part had been returned. Historians have long debated what exactly their relationship was. Some say it was a deep friendship, pure and powerful in a way we've forgotten how to name. Others suggest it might have been romantic, pointing to the intensity, the cohabitation, and Lincoln's lifelong discomfort with traditional masculinity. But here's the truth, we don't know for sure. And maybe that's the point. In a world that demands labels, the bond between Abraham Lincoln and Joshua Speed resists easy classification. It lives somewhere between friendship and love, between necessity and devotion. It reminds us that intimacy isn't always physical, and that emotional closeness can matter just as much. It reminds us that one man, alone in a strange town, found comfort in the kindness of another. That a young lawyer on the brink of despair found in a friend the will to keep going. And perhaps most of all, it reminds us that even the greatest men in history, presidents, legends, icons, were once just boys who needed someone to listen. When Abraham Lincoln died in 1865, thousands mourned across the nation. His coffin made a slow journey by train, winding from Washington, D.C. back to his home in Springfield, Illinois. Crowds gathered in silence. Men wept openly. Women clutched handkerchiefs. Children stood on fences for one last glimpse of the man they had only ever seen in newspapers. But among the mourners was someone who grieved differently. Joshua Speed. He didn't write a grand tribute. He didn't give a public eulogy. He simply mourned, quietly and personally. They had known each other in youth, long before Lincoln was a statesman or a martyr. Long before he was a face on currency or a statue in marble. Speed had known him when he was awkward, insecure, heartbroken. He had shared not just a bed, but a home, a life, 1,000 conversations that history will never hear. And perhaps that's why, after all the grandeur, what remained was something quieter. Something simpler. Two men. A friendship. A bond that shaped a presidency. A bed that held not scandal, but solace. In the end, Lincoln's relationship with Joshua Speed wasn't about secrets. It was about survival. And in that survival, we find the story of how one of America's loneliest men endured the weight of history, because, for a while, he didn't have to carry it alone.